the United States military, thank you for your service. I've had a lot of time over the last several weeks to reflect on my relationship with military veterans, reservists, and service members, folks I've known personally for many years, folks I work with professionally, and the hundreds of thousands of people that I've never met to this day. And I think a lot about what they bring to the table as individuals when they leave the military and when they go into the civilian working world. And the truth is, there is such an incredible skill set that our veterans possess. So many lessons that civilians can learn from military veterans, that organizations can learn from the United States military, and still so much work to be done to help facilitate transition of military service members into the civilian working world. So I want to welcome you to a very special edition of Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks. This is my first video in quite some time that has not dealt with breast cancer awareness and push-ups, and today we're focusing on Veterans Day 2023. We're heading into Veterans Day weekend, and just a couple days ago, this past Wednesday, November the 8th, I had an opportunity to help lead a panel of employees at Crestron Electronics, which is where I work. And I serve there in a leadership capacity of talent development, campus relations, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that includes our relationship with our veteran employees and recruitment efforts with military veterans as a very intentional area within our total talent strategy at Crestron. And I heard from 4 employees, 3 of whom are military veterans, and 1 of whom has a son in active duty in the Marines right now. And what they had to say about the skill sets of veterans and service members and what organizations can do to better prepare and equip themselves to bring those veterans in and take advantage of and help develop that skill set really resonated with me. And so today I want to share with you some of the unique skills that military veterans possess as our way of saying thank you to all the men and women who have served us so bravely and so proudly for so long. Let's start with accountability. Now, if you've watched Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks before, if you subscribe to the channel, you may have seen a video in which I explored the concept of accountability and the power of a term called "that's on me," and the ability to hold oneself accountable, to hold others accountable in a positive way, in the correct way, and to create an organizational culture where blame and scapegoating and dishonesty out of fear of blame can't exist and can't thrive. If you want proof of concept as to the value and the importance of accountability, look no further than the United States Armed Forces. During the panel, my good friend Kumani said, and he is a veteran of the United States Navy, he said, look at the person on your left and look at the person on your right. You are accountable to them, to yourself, and to the mission. Very powerful words from my friend Kumani. Woven into accountability is a larger concept of trust. Your team has to be able to trust you, to hold yourself accountable, just as you need to be able to trust your team to do the same. Now, in the armed forces, sometimes that trust and accountability can be life or death, as soldiers are quite literally putting their lives in the hands of others, the person to their left, the person to their right. It comes with a mountain of trust that they will hold themselves accountable for the job that needs to get done. Being accountable to yourself, being accountable to your team, being accountable to the organization and the task at hand is a critical skill. And there's a form of pride and a form of character that we all benefit from having, and it stems from this concept of accountability. And that is a skill that members of the United States military come to us with at a very high level. The next skill that I want to highlight is leadership. Now, I am a self professed leadership nerd and I am proud of it. I consume information and studies about leadership. And what's interesting is that studying leadership often brings me to examples and stories from the military. During the Crestron panel, I heard from Matt, a veteran of the United States Army and an expert in supply chain management. Matt said something that really resonated with me, explaining that the military does an incredible job of training leadership at all levels. You don't have to be an officer to learn leadership. That was very powerful. Furthermore, Ariana, a veteran of the United States Army, a current reservist, and a graduate of West Point Military Academy, told us that being a good follower is just as important as being a good leader. These quotes sum up two major points about leadership. Number one, you don't have to have a leadership role or title to be a leader. And number two, knowing how to follow is just as important a skill as knowing how to lead. Imagine for one moment what would happen in a military or a civilian situation if nobody was qualified to lead or direct the actions of the team members. Could you imagine what would happen if you had a group full of leaders that all tried to direct, but nobody was willing to take direction? What would happen if there were effective leaders, but nobody trained and developed and qualified the next group of leaders to succeed them? And there was no plan for the next leader to step up. The military teaches leadership and followership to ensure short-term and long-term success of missions, as well as skill succession for years and decades to come. Organizations must possess the same skills, and for many of the same reasons: short-term and long-term success and succession. Leadership is not specific to those with lofty leadership titles, and following is just as important as leading. The third skill that I want to highlight is teamwork and camaraderie. Now, organizations are always trying to find new ways to motivate their teams to work together as a unit, to come together to be greater than the sum of its parts. We hear this a lot in sports analogies. There are organizations that seem to be loaded with generational talent, but because they never really act as a unit, they never really come together and gel as a team, they often underachieve. There are other teams that are perceived as being a little bit less talented who are incredible at coming together as a unit, playing for each other, playing within a system. And they often will overcome those quote unquote more talented teams because of their ability to come together and gel as a unit. Well, the United States military has mastered the concept of teamwork and camaraderie, or what Matt, the veteran on our panel, described as esprit de corps. Esprit de corps is a term I had never heard before this panel on Wednesday. And esprit de corps is this sense of fellowship, loyalty, and togetherness that that individuals within a group share, that bring them together. Matt talked about attending the annual Army-Navy football game with his son, and how the entire stadium was just brimming with esprit de corps, even though not everybody attending the game had served the U.S. military. Everybody had this reverence and this respect and this loyalty, not just for the Army team or the Navy team, but for the team that both Army and Navy are part of, the larger team and organization that we really need to be constantly gelling as a unit. Esprit de corps. Teams that can come together, hold each other accountable, and feel a sense of pride and loyalty are sure to perform at the highest possible level. I want to highlight for you today is empathy. Now, some time ago, I had the pleasure of doing a focus group with Kumani, Ariana, and another friend and colleague of mine named Steven, who is also a military veteran. I'd asked all of them, independent of one another, about skills that they had learned from the military that helped with their transition into a civilian working opportunity. And independent of one another, one of the skills they all highlighted was empathy. I wasn't expecting that one when I was asking the questions of the focus group or in these individual interviews, but it came up in every single discussion. Each of these veterans described examples of being in a unit or being in a battalion or a squadron of people that they didn't necessarily choose, they probably never met before, and they didn't know particularly well until they got into that group, until they got into their armed forces unit with each other. They all had their own unique background. They came from all over the country. They came from every race, gender, and socioeconomic background and status that you could think of. And now they were fused together as a unit with unified goals. What I learned was how this experience instilled each of them with this sense of empathy for others. Empathy is a building block of emotional intelligence, which is one of the most impactful personal and professional skills that we can ever possess. And it has a greater impact on long-term success than most other skills. Empathy. They learn that in the United States military. There are plenty more skills that I could list and describe that veterans come to the workforce with. But these four I specifically wanted to highlight today because they really resonated with me and they made an impact on me as a civilian during this panel discussion and during my interactions with my colleagues who served in the United States military. So once again, there are incredible, unique skills that military veterans leave the military with and come to the civilian working world with. But there's still so much work left to be done. It isn't enough to just thank and appreciate our veterans. That's what Veterans Day means to a lot of us, an opportunity to stop and say thank you. But there's more that we can do. We have an opportunity, and as a matter of fact, we have a duty to facilitate the transition of the members of our military into civilian work so they can utilize these skills in new ways, so they can help teach these skills to others, and so they can maximize their potential and their opportunity and make their organizations and make us even better. Approximately 55% of veterans say that the biggest challenge in their transition from the military to civilian life is employment. This is despite the fact that organizations tend to rate military veterans' performance as being above average. Despite track records of above average performance in the workplace, a lot of military veterans who are seeking jobs in the civilian working world face an uphill climb. A lot of hiring managers and leaders within our organizations aren't equipped with some of the skills that they need to understand how to interview and integrate veterans into their organizations. Managers may not be prepared to understand how military experience directly translates to their organization, much the same way that the veteran themselves may struggle to explain their military skills in a civilian setting. There's still work to be done. We all have an opportunity this Veterans Day 2023 to consider how we can help facilitate that transition, how we can embrace military veterans who work with us in our organization, how we can continue to employ, train, develop, promote, and learn from those who have served the United States military, how we can continue to support members of the National Guard and members of the Reserves, those who want to continue serving their country while also working in the civilian working world. There are so many opportunities here, but not the least of them is an opportunity that we all have to say thank you to all of the men and women who have served the U.S. military, to all of our veterans, to the spouses and the family members of those who have served, to all the branches of the U.S. military. Thank you for everything that you have done everything you do and everything that you will do. And thank you for spending a little bit of time with me today at Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks. Happy Veterans Day, everybody.